No Game, No Life. Volume 7, Chapter 2, Part 2. Whodunnit. Overthinking. The 152nd space. Following their third roll, 84, to the 204th. According to Shiro's map, this plane grazed the state of High West in the Elven Guard domain on the continent of Lucia. The rocks had faded to teal and gave way to a barren plain on the verge of becoming a desert. Here, those watched from on high headed toward the end of the possibilities that even a god knew not. Now. Oh yeah! Screw walking on foot. Tools are where it's at! He shouted gleefully. Human potential lies not in the body, but in the mind. Flying through the wind, tearing across the wasteland, on a Harley, toward the full stop. They threw the engine into high gear and sped off with literal abandon. Sora? What is this? Brother. Slow down. The middle-aged man who'd crammed the pair of shrieking toddlers about 2 years old into the sidecar howled. Prattle not so, my little sister. Can you not hear it? The voice of the wind telling us to become like light. At her brother's cryptic assertion, the madness visible in his eyes through his goggles, Shiro thought. It all started a few hours ago. It had been 18 days since the start of the game when they ran out of food. Oh man, this sucks. I want to go home. We're so screwed. We're all gonna die. Brother, it's okay to cross the goal line, isn't it? Oh, look at the flying pink elephant. We could just get on that and we'd be there in a jiffy. The three of them were still on their second move, creeping along like ghosts across the 58 spaces they'd rolled during their random number analysis ritual. In the first place, they'd been miraculously lucky to obtain a carriage early on. Having lost it, they'd intended to procure another vehicle or even build themselves a bicycle. Except this off-road trail stretching 580 kilometers was too rugged for such shoddy contraptions. Every time they lost a mode of transportation they'd suffered to round up, their hearts had cracked a fraction more, until finally... God, why don't we just walk? Of like defeated minds, the trio reluctantly set out on foot. As players landed on Sora's and Shiro's tasks, their dice increased steadily. Nevertheless, the three of them could only seek shade from the sun, endure the rain, and worry about wild animals as they walked and walked. So things went on for over 2 weeks, until they ran out of food and were finally left moaning in despair. Just then, though, their vision suddenly went dark, and after their 119th load screen, they finally reached their destination. Their roll of 58 had led them to the 120th space, and task. Sora and company stood alone in the wide open wasteland, where there likewise stood a sign. Name the manufacturer of this motorcycle. If you get it right, it's yours. It sat beside the task Sora and Shiro had ridden. A large, high-displacement motorcycle with sidecar attached, tank full, engine humming. Predictably, this was a question that only Sora or Shiro, or maybe Jabril, could answer. Harley. After throwing the dice again, Sora straddled the Harley, grinning as if he'd just witnessed a miracle performed before his very eyes. Ha ha! Making over half my tasks about vehicles finally paid off. Oh, roar, my V-type, liquid-cooled, DOHC evolution engine. Let us zoom across the spiraling horizon. Come, let us go to the unyielding space beyond. And that's how this came to pass. Brother, do you have a license? Asking a question to which she knew the answer perfectly well was Shiro's attempt to distract herself from her fear as the wind beat against her face. Of course he didn't. A motorcycle license? The fastest thing he'd ever ridden was a mommy bike. There was no reason for a socially incompetent, shut-in loser like him to have one. A license to ride a Harley? Ha! Sure I do! But as he jabbed his heart with his thumb, her brother's answer defied her expectations. I have old guy soul, and American spirit, right in my heart. Brother, we're Japanese. We hardly even have Japanese spirit. We're shut-ins. Having collected Shiro and Steph's dice, Sora appeared 43.2 years old. And that's age fraud. Come to your senses. But looks notwithstanding, inside, he was still Sora, virgin, actually 18. Be calm, my little sister. Your elder brother's heart is in an enlightened state, heretofore unknown. Good enough? Shiro nodded uneasily at her brother's Buddha-like smile. Such an illogical segue like this was the best proof that things weren't good by any stretch. But you categorize people according to their country of birth. Do you mean to say something so sad? We are the world. We are the children. On the verge of bursting into song, Sora looked through his goggles into the distance. Do you mean to suggest that unless one is born in Japan, one cannot understand the Japanese concept of harmony? To feel harmony, to respect harmony. Do you mean to tell me that unless one is born within the borders drawn on the map and labeled Japan, one cannot grasp this? Your elder brother disagrees. Well, but brother... America. A fine example. The only American race is that of its citizens. Am I correct? Yeah. It's a country of immigrants. But those merely born in America, or even those who have immigrated there, call themselves Americans with pride. It is to touch the heart. It is to know the heart. It is when one comes in contact with, not the borders, but the collective culture built by the people, that one finds the same heart in oneself. Therefore, it is not a question of birth. Another Buddha-like smile. Sora's expression as he shouted made him look like the wrathful Bodhisattva Vajrapani. Shiro was now certain. Within this Harley resides an American soul. Now I am America! What do I do? Brothers snapped. Anyway, it's not like it's a public road, right? And Earth law doesn't apply, right? And there are no cops, right? The man who proclaimed himself America stammered out a list of chicken shit qualifiers. Shiro, I'm not imagining it, am I? Sora's broken, isn't he? In the sidecar with Shiro, who was approximately 2.2 years of age, was a girl buried beneath their luggage, Steph, approximately 1.8 years of age. She dejectedly muttered her suspicion, and Shiro sympathized with her completely, albeit reluctantly. And also, we'll soon encounter a serious problem. Problem? There's no problem. From America with love. Let it be! Brother, the Beatles were British. I will not let it be! Shiro, you know what I mean. We must pick some flowers. I'm a babe. Babes don't pee. Say what? Can't you hear over the wind and engine? Speak up! Sora decided to leverage his sudden bout of protagonist deafness to get Shiro to repeat herself, but she ignored him. Drawing the tablet from her backpack and crushing Steph in the process, Shiro thought. For her brother to break so thoroughly meant he was functioning properly. More than 18 days since the start of the game. 436 hours and 18 minutes, to be precise. They had run out of food and grown increasingly weary, having failed to manage to get any sleep. Even if there were no monsters, there could be wild dogs or insects or weather. Dangers sufficient to kill a person were abundant. Environments where they could relax and take a break were rare on this long trip. It would be abnormal not to break down. Except for someone who had the best portable bed, who could be carried on her brother's back or lie on his chest when she got tired of walking. Shiro. In that case, now it's time for my job, she muttered, commencing her analysis. Start situation processing. Breakdown of dice counts and approximate ages. Sora, 24 dice, 43.2 years. Shiro, 2 dice, 2.2 years. Steph, 1 die, 1.8 years. The reason Sora had so many dice, and Shiro and Steph were so young, wasn't, of course, for the sake of the old manso with the Harley license. Becoming small meant they ate less. When they walked, they prioritized endurance and distributed their dice accordingly. The reason Shiro had 2 and Steph had 1 was so Shiro wouldn't drop to 0 if, by chance, someone overcame one of her tasks. It was thanks to having consistently and appropriately adapted the distribution of their dice that they'd come this far. However, the elder brother was the one who had each time carried this burden without so much as a peep. As a result, it was no surprise he was the flagship, since, despite the amount of damage to his vessel, he never sank. All of Steph's considerations and demands were excluded. Steph had resigned herself to proceed boldly with the mindset. I'm pantless anyhow, so I can't be embarrassed. Urgent. Must find food for brother. An environment where brother can sleep. Current location. Space 152. The west edge of the state of High West in Elvengard. Dice. Spaces left to destination. Estimated time and fuel required. Oh. Shiro had zoomed out the map on her tablet. She gasped when she discovered something just barely within their current space. Immediately, she started crunching numbers. No, calculating, and whispered, "Brother, 2.4 kilometers east, in a small town, there's an inn." An inn? An inn! That sounds wonderful, after sleeping in the wild for over 2 weeks without a bath. Steph, crushed by Shiro and their luggage, had whispered with all her might, even before Sora could speak. "Surely there's a bathroom as well." Steph didn't say it, but she glanced at Shiro, who nodded. But Sora furrowed his brow slightly in reluctance. Of course he would, Shiro thought, since the word bath had been mentioned, and Shiro hadn't flinched. However, "Please, let us hasten there. Hasten, hasten, to the flowers, the flowers!" "You're awfully gung-ho about flowers at a time like this. What you gonna do with the flowers? Eat them?" "Let us make haste there now. If you don't go that way, I shall leak from here." All right, ready." Just when I was getting my groove on." Sora was in such fine form, it was hard to tell if this was his last flicker before the candle went out. With a reluctant pout, he tilted the vehicle. It drifted spectacularly, the sidecar coming off the ground as sand flew up from his turn. "Yeah! Is this the only way you can get this contraption to turn?" "Yep!" Shiro couldn't help but be impressed by the way her brother lied without a moment's hesitation. "Is that so? Then I suppose there's nothing to be done about it." "Ah!" The bike headed off into a small forest, Steph's wail blaring like a horn. As luck would have it, a man was likewise racing across the 150-second space on all fours faster than the cloud of Steph's caterwauling. Cloaked in an aura of sooty red, it was Ino Hatsutse. With 4 dice, he was approximately 39.2 years of age. The crimson mist was the vapor of his blood boiling, the proof of his blood break. "Yes, well, it was my mistake, I suppose. My blunder, without a shred of an excuse." The rusty color was the proof of the murderous, sneering beast's boiling wrath. Inu was pissed, teed off like never before. 2 moves back, he had landed on a certain space where a booming voice had announced, "Shred that thing between your legs and die for the sake of the world." The task he himself had written. Death. Naturally, Inu had closed his eyes. One who killed might also be killed. He'd long been ready for this. He knew it had been coming to him. But for his soon-to-be shredded, illustrious member, he shed a solitary tear. And so he accepted everything, awaiting for death for a few minutes, a few hours, before finally realizing his vague task was not binding. At the same time, having been praying that Azuna would not land on his task, Inu wept in relief. He'd prayed, even prostrated himself every hour and supplicated to the holy shrine maiden. He'd repented, regretted, tormented himself. And for the first time in his life, he begged with bitter tears, sincerely and with all his heart, to that one true God. "Oh, almighty smug little bitch above, please, for once, make a non-dickish move." His prayer had been granted. his dear Izuna would not have to die for his folly. It had been granted not in benevolence, but rather with an LMAO. Thus, Ino had come to know that there was nothing in this world that would heed a prayer of charity. This world, rather, was filled with malevolence, which he had to correct, starting with that monkey who had surely been trolling him all along, Sora. Here was what Inu had been thinking. Unlike himself, Izuna was clever. She would surely catch on to the true nature of this game and win. That had freed him to make sure he wiped out Sora, fully intending to give his dice to Izuna if the chance arose. But that would no longer do, Inu knew. So he shaved down his life as he sprinted for the goal. If he made it, all demands would be granted, which meant he had to run toward victory for the world, the death of King Sora. His sense of reason told him he'd gotten what he deserved. For having tried to kill another, it was a proper, or rather, too generous price. Why did people fight? They fought for peace. Wasn't this putting the cart before the horse? But now, in this situation, it was too late for him to be talking smart. Why did he fight? Because he was a fool. Clowns who put the noose around their own necks and then got mad at other people deserved to honk like clowns. In other words, I just can't help wanting to sink my fist into your stinking mug, you know. You damn monkey! That was one thing. This was another. I beg your pardon. Purely as a figure of speech, you understand. Would you be Mr. Ino Hatsutse? Inu had just braced himself to carve into his life and break the sound barrier when he noticed Jabril calmly standing beside him. I suppose your bird-brain nature cannot be helped, but are you aware that even birds have decent eyes? His form might have appeared more youthful. There was only one male werebeast in this game. At Ino's jab, Jabril looked at some book and gave a slight nod. My apologies. I have never paid particular attention to the distinction between werebeasts and dogs, it being but a difference of bipedal versus quadrupedal locomotion. And now you bring up the sexes. Oh, how's this? If you simply remain quadrupedal as you are for eternity, then we can classify you both together as beasts and save an entry in the dictionary. Hearing Jabril's sunny suggestion, Inu unconsciously stopped running. Quietly, he stood in a wordless gesture of defiance. Ah, what a pity. Well, that aside, as if she really didn't care, the disappointment on Jabril's face only lasted an instant when, whip, she pointed to the forest. I sense 3 amenities there. 2 must be my masters, yes? Why do you ask me? Oh, I was just thinking I'd greet them. But please feel free to resume crawling along the earth as you were. I'm done here, so piss off. Jabril communicated telepathically as she flew off with a smile. Inu mumbled doubtfully as he watched her go. Why is that bitch still here? That maniac could teleport all she wanted. Wait, the rules about advancing spaces, according to the dice, might have closed that off. but she was still able to follow Inu easily, despite the fact he'd been running hard enough to achieve the speed of sound. Why would she still be here, much less take the time to tell Inu that she was going to greet Sora and Shiro? Cool your head a bit. Does she mean for me to ask? Inu still could not understand the true nature of this game, but there was something odd in courtesy so unbefitting Flugel.